Okay, and we are now live, so we will call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. We're going to start with elections of the chair and the vice chair. So are there any nominations for chair? Councillor Carpenter?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Greg Martin for chair.
Councillor Martin, do you accept the nomination?
With thanks to my nominator, I will.
Okay. Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay, seeing none, Councillor Martin, you are acclaimed as chair of the Finance Committee for this year. Are there any nominations for vice chair? Councillor Utley? Oh, Councillor, I think you're muted.
I'd be willing to serve as vice with the
I nominate Councillor Utley.
Committee.
Okay, and you accept the nomination, Councillor Utley, from Councillor Van Tilburg?
I do. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, seeing none, Councillor Utley, you are acclaimed as vice chair. You can go ahead and get started, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. And the roll call is done?
The roll call has been taken.
Okay. I'd just like to remind the committee and the viewing public of a few procedural rules for our virtual meetings in operation as efficiently as possible. All members will be muted for the meeting to reduce feedback. All web cameras for committee members shall be turned on to ensure and track quorum. Staff will be requested to join the video meeting should the need to answer questions from members of committee arise. Any member of committee should indicate if they wish to speak by pressing the raised hand button on the participant list screen. Clerk staff will lower the hand when you have been recognized by the chair for your speaking opportunity. In the event of a connection or service interruption that affects quorum of the committee, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will be adjourned. All members of the committee participating via online video conference will vote using the e-scribe, and the clerk will announce the vote results. Members of the public who registered as delegates are now able to take part electronically via webcam or via the telephone for the meetings. All rules for delegations under the city's procedural bylaw continue to apply. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none. Separation of items. Item 6.2.1 is automatically separated. Are there any other separations by the committee? Mayor Davis.
6.2.5, the reserve report.
Councillor Vanderstel.
6.2.4, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Any others? Councillor Carpenter.
6.1.2.
Okay. Any others? Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder for all the items not separated? Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Utley, thank you. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Sorry, just prior to calling the vote, just to confirm the items subject to the vote are as follows. Item 6.1.1, property 2021 property tax policy. Item 6.1.3, letter of agreement for 2020-2021 dedicated gas tax funds for public transportation program from the Ministry of Transportation. Item 6.2.2, financing lease policy establish non-material lease categories for 2021. 6.2.3, quarterly status report of contracts awarded, and 6.2.6, the minutes. Okay, and items for consideration and consent not separated for discussion purposes is carried on the 6th unanimously. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Vanderstelt, Councillor Martin, Councillor Utley, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Van Tilburg.
Okay, that brings us to tonight's delegation. Please note delegation will have 10 minutes inclusive of questions of members in keeping with City of Brantford procedural bylaw 15.6.2. Please ensure that all comments are directly related to the matter before the committee. We have David Warren, Judy Powell from St. Joseph Life Care Center. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Good evening, councillors and Mayor Davis. My name is Julie Powell, and I am the President and CEO of St. Joseph's Life Care Foundation. I'm joined by David Wormold, President of St. Joseph's Life Care Center. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be here this evening with a request for funding consideration. Next slide. We come before you each year, so I know that you're familiar with our organizations, but here's a quick overview. St. Joseph's Life Care Center Brantford is a campus of care that includes Stedman Community Hospice, St. Joseph's Long-Term Care, and a number of community partners. Next slide. So I'm going to speak to you first of all about Stedman Hospice, and then I will turn it over to David to talk to you about St. Joseph's Long-Term Care. The hospice was founded in 2004 and is a 10-bed residential hospice facility. Hospice, as you know, is a concept of care, a collection of programs and services that focus on the comfort and support of the patient and their family, rather than a cure for disease. Our mission is to care for anyone at any age or any stage of any life-threatening illness. We ensure that our patients are provided with the best end-of-life care so that they and their loved ones can celebrate living life to the fullest. I'm sure many of you have either had a hospice experience through a family member or friend or have heard about us. And such, you probably know about our beautiful facility, but hospice really is so much more than a beautiful home-like building. It's about caring for our community. Next slide. So what's the impact of Stedman Community Hospice? Here is a snapshot of our patients at the hospice for a one-year time period. We've been honored to care for 146 patients in hospice with an average length of stay of 24 days. 916 families have been supported through our outreach services, 655 families supported through bereavement services, and 66% of all of our hospice patients are from within the City of Brantford. Next slide. So those are really just numbers. Let me tell you a little bit about a family. Jamie Cork was a star outfielder with the Brantford Red Sox in the 1970s and 80s and went on to coach and umpire. He left a legacy in Brantford as a member of the city's Sports Hall of Fame, and he was named one of the top 100 IBL players of all time in 2018. He was equally a hero to his family. Jamie Cork spent his final days in hospice after a stage 4 colon cancer diagnosis. He passed away on December 6, 2019. His son Brandon shared this quote with us. Just the experience we were allowed to have at the hospice, the comfort, the visiting, the atmosphere that just really allows for those last days of life to be not something filled with a hospital room. The 5 days he spent there were a blessing. After Jamie passed away, his wife Vicky participated in our 10-week bereavement support program. The Cork family is really just one example of so many families that have been impacted by the hospice. Next slide. A few of the challenges for the hospice are the demand for end-of-life care. It is growing dramatically as the population ages. Limited provincial funding, which has not increased since we opened our doors back in 2004. Only a portion of our nursing care is actually provided by the provincial government. And the hospice relies very heavily on community support through donations. Next slide. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on the hospice, not just financially, but also in the way our services are delivered to the community. Some of the challenges specific to the pandemic include provincial legislation that required us to close our door to our volunteers, and volunteers support the hospice in so many ways. Necessary to hire additional staff to perform essential duties traditionally done by volunteers. To prevent the spread of the virus, we had to limit visitation within the hospice. As a result, our outreach program saw a lot more activity. The purchase of PPE was necessary, but this was not funded by the government. And we are no longer able to raise funds through our crowd gathering events and the shutdown of businesses. So real loss of donor dollars into the hospice. And there is an expectation from our local healthcare partners for us to contribute to reducing the burden within the system by expediting admissions. Next slide. So what are we asking you to consider? We are asking you to consider support for our residential hospice as well as our outreach program. These dollars will provide for frontline staff at the hospice. It will provide for certified palliative care staff, both in hospice as well as community outreach. The outreach program offers a quick response to patients in their homes, and we send out a team of dedicated medical personnel to the patient. As well as they're there to assist families who may be grieving or in a state of crisis. Last year, we came to City Council asking for consideration of $200,000 in funding for hospice, which you generously granted. We know that this year is unlike any other for the city. We know the casino dollars have been dramatically impacted. What we're asking you to consider this year is the same that we asked the County of Brant to consider, is a contribution of $100,000 in funding toward the hospice. Even during a pandemic, the hospice continues to serve the community. As I mentioned, our outreach programs have increased dramatically. This year, more than any other year, we need the support of the entire community. Please help us continue the incredible work of the hospice. Hospice really is here for everyone. I'm going to turn it over to David to talk about the long-term care center.
Thank you, Julie, and good afternoon. Next slide, please. So across our campus of care, our mission, our vision, and our values they're steadfast, and they do guide us to keep our residents, patients, families, and staff safe and well during the pandemic. And as we've seen across, our country, province, and local community, we've heard the heart-wrenching accounts of residents and families' experiences during the pandemic. And to that end, our long-term care residents want what we all want for our loved ones and ourselves, to live their lives with as much dignity, comfort, and mobility, and a safe and supportive environment. Next slide. I just wanted to share with you that over almost 55% of our long-term care residents are aged 85 and above, and a very small number, 3.5%, are under 65. The average age of a resident is 83.5 years, and our oldest resident, who we've celebrated our birthday, was 107 years. Our average length of stay is around 2.9 years. Our longest length of stay is 18 years, and notably 70% of our resident population are female. Next slide. Could you go to the previous slide? I think we may have missed one. Thank you. So of our residents, there are 120 with unspecified dementia. And I think what differentiates us from other long-term care homes is that 51 of these residents live in secured units. And this is 25% of our entire population. And this really is a subset of residents that is the focus of our request today. Next slide. We know that social connection is a really important health issue in long-term care, and it's the key to quality of life. The pandemic has resulted in the Ministry of Long-Term Care implementing Directive 3, which includes COVID-19 visiting policies to safely receive visitors while protecting the residents, staff, and visitors from COVID-19. Consequently, the visiting policy has reduced resident social interaction by restricting long-term care visitors, including family and friends, in order to maintain physical distance measuring and decrease viral transmissions. And notably, the long-term care residents have a high prevalence and increased baseline risk of developing mental health conditions, including depression, delirium, and behavioral problems. And the visiting policy is really guided by 4 principles around safety, emotional well-being, equitable access, and flexibility. And this is a challenge for us to be able to provide those 4 principles as it relates to those residents that are in our secured unit. Next slide. And so our funding request is for $50,000 so that we would be able to fund an outdoor gazebo to enhance the secured resident home area outdoor fence space that would support shaded resident and family outdoor visits and resident recreation activities. We know that the addition of this gazebo would also support the emotional well-being of our residents by providing them with additional safe, flexible, and accessible space. Next slide. At St. Joe's, our decisions, our practices, and care are all guided by a desire to support our residents to live their best life possible by minimizing the effects of disease and disability. And this can only be realized by providing the best environment to support our residents. And we're proud to consider the city as a partner in our mission to celebrate each life with dignity and safety, enriching lives and transforming care always. And we thank you for your remarkable and long-standing support for St. Joseph's. Next slide. So thank you for your consideration. The Stedman Community Hospice is seeking $100,000 and St. Joseph's Long-Term Care are seeking $50,000. And this has helped to support the most vulnerable in our community facing their final life's journey with dignity, compassion, and care. Thank you.
And that used up the full 10 minutes, so we don't have time for questions. So can I have a mover and a seconder to put the separated items on the floor? Councillor Utley. Seconder, Councillor Carpenter, thank you. And the first item will be 6.2.1. Any discussion? Councillor Utley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is Julie still available? Julie, are you there? Looks like oh, there she is.
Yep.
Julie, in your presentation, you mentioned that a portion of the nursing costs are paid for by the province, I would assume. But what percentage is that gets paid?
So if we were to look at the hospice's overall budget, about $3 million, over $1.3 million comes from the community, and a large portion of that is for the nursing staff, and then obviously the operating of the hospice food and all the other things that go along with that. But a large portion of the $1.3 million we raise within the community, a large portion of that is the nursing staff.
Okay. I always had an understanding that there was the province covered, the Ministry of Health covered nursing costs, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, it certainly is the community's responsibility for a portion of it. It is not all entirely covered by the government. Yeah. All right,
then you learn something every day in this job. So thanks, Julie, and you guys do great work. So
thank you very much.
Marvelous. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderstelt.
I thank you for your latitude, Chair. I do have a funding question related to the effect of COVID. Will you allow that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to Julie. She disappeared again, but hopefully she'll come back.
There she is.
There she is. Thank you, Julie. My question is related to the effect that COVID has had on your fundraising ability. And I'd like to know if you have the comparative numbers from this year as opposed to last year, the 2 years of fundraising efforts, and how do they compare?
Yeah, I don't know that I can give you sort of an overall total off the top of my head. I can sort of give you a bit of an idea as far as our organization is the foundation is very heavily funded through events in the community. So we had to cancel one of our largest events last year, our Handbags for Hospice, which raises over $150,000. Our hike event had to go to a virtual format, so we were down about $50,000 on that event. We have a number of different groups in the community that support us by organizing events with proceeds coming to the hospice. That figure is probably in the neighborhood of $125,000 to $150,000 every year. So we probably saw $25,000 come in. So that is down about $100,000 over last year. So it really has had quite a dramatic impact on us this year.
So $250,000?
Yeah, at least. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Julia, and thank you for all your hard work there.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Carpenter.
Is this 6.2.1?
Yes, it is.
Because I didn't see anything in the report about the hospice in St. Joe's. So my daughter-in-law works for St. Joe's. I'll declare a conflict then. And I don't see that in the report, so I don't understand why we're discussing it.
Well, I think the delegation is hoping to get included in the report, and they're not currently included.
Well, my understanding was you needed to be on the agenda before you could come as a delegation, so that's what threw me off. Thank you.
Okay. Any
Yeah,
further
I like
questions?
all
Any further questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the question.
Item 6.2.1, fourth quarter casino report, carries on a recorded vote of 5-0. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Martin, Councillor Utley, and Councillor Van Tilburg, noting Councillor Carpenter's conflict of interest.
Okay, now we move to 6.1.2, development charge policy, interest policy. I believe that was just Councillor Carpenter.
Yes, thank you. So I need to get to this. The interest rate that we're going to charge here, I see that there's a wide range. What was the rate that we picked? Was it 2%?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, we're recommending prime plus 2%.
Prime to plus 2. Now, some of them have, as it would be that it's charging 5%. Is it prime plus 5%?
It's just 5%.
Okay, so the prime now is what is prime now? 2%?
No, currently prime is 1.45%, I believe.
Okay, is there a maximum that we can charge?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the province has not prescribed a rate as of yet.
And if we charge prime plus 2% currently, does that make up for the cutbacks the province made in the development charges, our losses? Will we balance out even?
It's difficult to say whether it will balance out even, but it's certainly a measure the province put in place through the amendments to the Act to allow the interest to be calculated so that the impact of those freezing of those rates would be mitigated from the time that site application or zoning bylaw application was deemed complete to the time that the building permit was taken out. So it was definitely put in place to mitigate the impact as well as giving the developer a bit of certainty in being able to calculate what their ending rate might be as well.
And the developer has the opportunity to pay over installments. So that loss of that revenue is calculated as part of that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. The installment is only applicable for very certain specific developments. So that would include rental units, as well as institutional development, and a longer installment period for nonprofit housing. Any other type of development is not eligible for installment and still would be required to pay whatever their development charge rate was, plus any interest that had accumulated from the time it had frozen. They would still be required to pay that full amount at building permit issuance.
Thanks, Joe. Just one final question then. When do we expect to have our development charge review ready for council approval?
Through Mr. Chair, so there's currently two components of that. The first step we're undertaking with our consultant Hemson is to recommend area-specific development charge. So there is a report coming to council on the 23rd. We expect to get the necessary background study out to the public late this month. There's been a special council meeting or a special committee of the whole scheduled for the end of March to do the statutory public meeting requirement of that. And that would hopefully lead to bylaw adoption at the end of April. After that, we'll be getting into our citywide development charges review in the hopes of having that entire process completed with a new bylaw and citywide rates implemented by the end of September.
They couldn't be done concurrently?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just with the amount of work that's required in updating the background studies and the need to really proceed with an area specific development charge, giving the approval of the OP is coming, and development that's expected to occur very soon in those expansion lands. Our focus really was to get the area specific rate in place first, and then go forward with the remaining services, all of our soft services, Parks and Rec and police and all of those other services, and updating those rates as part of the citywide.
Okay, and the area rating, I assume, is for the new boundary lands. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I had one question. It says in the report that we're allowed to add arrears to the tax roll. What's the interest rate that's charged on delinquent taxes?
I'm not sure if Pat is still on the line. Yep,
There
he
he is.
is.
Oh, hi there. Yeah, I'm still here. Through the chair, it's 1.25% per month. So it's
Okay.
15% a year.
Okay, and will that happen automatically, that arrears get put on the taxes so that they'll incur the higher interest rate?
I'm not sure of the process to add the taxes on. Once they're on, they will incur the rate monthly. Someone else may have to speak to how they get on the tax roll.
Yeah, so between finance, building and planning, we'll be developing a process to ensure these applications and those that are eligible for the deferral, making sure that any non-payment of those would be added to the taxes quickly.
Yes.
We currently have a process for property standards that is in place, where we get a memo and that direct us to add any of the unpaid property standards charges to the roll. So I would assume we would use the same process.
Okay, thank you. That's I can agree with the lower interest rate for this, as long as there's a higher interest rate if they're delinquent, and that's taken care of with this policy. Seeing no further questions, we'll call the question.
Item 6.1.2, development charges interest policy carries. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Martin, Councillor Utley, Councillor Van Tilburg.
Okay, 2.4. I'm not sure whether that was Councillor Vanderstel or Mayor Davis. Councillor Vanderstel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Joelle, I would assume. After reading the report, I got the impression that that the mileage was applied to all of our employees who claim mileage throughout the city. Is that correct, or is it a certain group?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is the rate that's applicable to all city employees for use of their personal vehicle for city business.
Okay, and do we have early numbers, comparative numbers over last year as a result of more people working from home? And what do those numbers look like?
In one of the appendices to the report, there is a 3-year comparison. So 2019 was just over $150,000 in total mileage paid, and in 2020 it was reduced to $104,000.
Okay, and going forward, do we have an expectation of where that's going to go? Is it going to drop further?
Through Mr. Chair, it's hard to say. A lot of the savings that resulted this year was due to the cancellation of a lot of in-person types of events. There may be some return to normalcy. I'm not sure that's going to happen in 2021, but over time, perhaps. But I will indicate that a significant portion of the annual mileage does relate to the bylaw enforcement team, who will be moving into city-owned vehicles for their work. So we would expect some ongoing reduction there because of that.
Okay, thanks for that. Is there any merit as we go forward and we find some savings in this area to perhaps find another way to support the increasing expenses in IT for communications?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly we identify efficiencies. All departments identify efficiencies as part of the annual budget process, which does go to offset some of the unavoidable increases that are seen in some other departments throughout the city. So that is an annual process of doing that. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. I appreciate it, Joelle. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
And item 6.2.4, mileage reimbursement rates for 2021 carries on a unanimous vote. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Vandersteldt, Councillor Martin, Councillor Ali, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Ward.
Okay, brings us to 2.5, Mayor Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. So first of all, Joelle, I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you move your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth? I think that might help. So Joelle, I'm going to make a statement and you tell me whether you agree. So you may recall, Chair, back when I first was elected, the very first Finance Committee meeting, I think I went about 45 minutes asking questions, but only was that long, about the reserve, these reserves. And at that time, my impression was that we had a lot of reserves that didn't make sense. We had reserves that were overfunded. There was a need for pruning, consolidating, and having a reasonable amount set aside in reserves. And I got to thank staff. I think you've done that because I didn't have very many questions when I went through it now. But I am left with one impression, Joelle, and I guess a little bit of concern because now I better understand what it is these reserves are going to fund and what those expenses are expected to be over the next, let's say, 5-6 years. And I think I've come to the conclusion our reserves are pretty lean. Am I correct in that assumption that they look to me to be almost like barely adequate in terms of what's coming up?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would agree that in a lot of cases, they are lean, and especially in our capital maintenance reserves are largely underfunded.
It's a real concern as we, move into dealing with housing and the boundary land infrastructure. And so I remain disquieted, I guess, no criticism, just the capital demands we're facing. But I do have 2 questions. And that's great, because originally about 2 years ago, I think it was about 50 questions, now only 2. And this is a perennial one for me, but it's at 535 industrial development. And this is to acquire industrial lands. And of course, that landscape has changed considerably the last decade, in the sense that, we typically now, that I don't think the city would be out there acquiring industrial property, but maybe I can be convinced that it would be. But anyways, do we really need $1 million for sitting in there? And I see we are not making annual contributions to that reserve. So what are we holding that for?
Through you, Mr. Chair. That is correct. There's no annual ongoing commitment to that reserve. I do believe our planned capital sees that reserve be completely depleted for some work in the Northwest. I was just going to get what it's exactly planned for, and I got booted out of my system here. So I might be able to get that for you in a second, though. I think if we had a longer term forecast on here, you would see that we are planning to exhaust the funding that's available there.
So that would be improvements in that Northwest Industrial Subdivision then? So it's not acquiring land, it's paying for improvements we have to do out there.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, well, that makes sense. So then one of the questions I have is, it's 505, the Downtown Reinvestment Program. So is this that grant program we had there for a while, facade grant program?
Through Mr. Chair, the facade was a small part of it, but there was a larger downtown business performance grant program. It was a much larger program with larger grants available for properties, I believe specifically in the downtown area. Most recently, the work that's being done on Dalhousie Street, behind our building, I believe it's the commercial block. There's some development work going there for units above the commercial. That is I believe our most recent downtown business performance grant. Some of the work done at the Laurier building at the Coburn Dalhousie gateway on the sort of the west end of or east end of the downtown to that building was also one of our most recent ones. But again, that's pretty much exhausts the available funds in that program. There's no annual commitment to that program any longer.
So I know I guess I went beyond 4 minutes. Thanks, Chair.
Well, there wasn't anybody else waiting to speak, so I'll let you go a little longer. Any other questions or comments? I just have one. Some municipalities raid their reserves in order to keep tax increases down, but that comes back to bite them later. And as was mentioned, our reserves are pretty lean now, so I hope during the operating budget, nobody looks to raid our reserves in order to mitigate a tax increase. With that, we'll call the question.
Sorry, with leave from the chair, just an administrative point. Councillor Carpenter, upon review, it looks like for item 6.1.2, the development charges interest policy, your vote did not register an e-scribe for some reason. Would you be, for the purposes of the minutes, would you be okay with registering your vote verbally for that item?
It didn't register because you had me locked out.
Oh, okay.
Same as you did for my conflict interest.
Okay, sorry, my apologies.
So I would have voted in the affirmative.
Thank you.
I just thought it was the same as my hand being.
Okay. We're ready to vote on this item then? All right, we'll call the vote. There we go.
Okay, item 6.2.5, quarterly reserve and reserve fund update. Report carries on a vote of 5-1. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Vanderstel, Councillor Martin, Councillor Utley, and Councillor Van Tilburg. Those opposed, Councillor Carpenter.
Okay, with that, we have no resolutions. There are no notice of motions. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, with that, we're adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.